We are students from the Harrisburg Academy, located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
According to a statistic by USA Today, Pennsylvania is the fifth most school segregated state.
Modern segregation is still a problem that our country faces, even after slavery was abolished.
And as students living in a country where this is a frequent issue, we want to change.
It all started in 1890, when a law was passed in Louisiana that provided for separate railway carriages for the white and colored races. It stated that all passenger railways had to provide these separate cars for different races, but that those same cars should remain equal in facilities, or in other words, separate but equal.
Plessy v. Ferguson was an 1896 U.S. Supreme Court decision that supported how unconstitutional racial segregation was under that same principle that individuals could still be separate but equal. On June 7, 1892, Plessy bought a train ticket from New Orleans to Covington, Louisiana, and sat down in an open seat in a whites-only car. The conductor insisted that he was seated elsewhere, and after Plessy's refusal to move, he was arrested and jailed.
After years of litigation, on May 18, 1896, the Supreme Court announced the decision had been made. The court ruled that the protections of the 14th Amendment applied only to political and civil rights, and denied that segregated railroad cars for blacks were necessarily inferior. This case marked a movement in how people really felt about equal rights in transportation, and would ultimately lead to the Brown v. Board of Education case. The year was 1952, and the Supreme Court was reviewing the Brown v. Board of Education case. This case ran mainly on the point that having black and white students attend different schools violates the Equal Protection Clause, also known as the 14th Amendment. It was decided that the case would be reheard in 1953, but one of the justices passed away before this could happen. He was replaced by the former governor of California, Earl Warren.
Earl Warren was able to rally all of the justices together to make a final and unanimous agreement. On May 14, 1954, it was determined that separate but equal had no place in the schools and education system. 1 year later, the justices came up with a plan to begin desegregating schools across the country. The justices had to implement this slowly because many people were outraged.
On September 4, 1957, 9 colored students were chosen to desegregate the Little Rock Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. They were greeted by an angry mob of 1,000 whites who attacked and prevented the children from entering the school. Even the current governor, Orville Faubus, tried to avert the 9 by sending the National Guard to block them. Later that month, however, President Dwight Eisenhower sent 1,000 troops to escort the Little Rock 9 into the building where on September 4th they would spend their first day of school.
Even though they got into the school, they faced many more challenges. Many of the students were physically and verbally abused. Melba Patillo had acid thrown in her face, and one even got expelled for trying to defend himself. Even the children's parents were harassed and fired from their jobs. By the end of the year, in 1958, Ernest Green, the only senior among the Little Rock 9, became the first African American to graduate from Little Rock Central High.
By the time the next year rolled around, Faubus had closed all of the schools in Little Rock, opening schools only for whites the following year. This left all black children nowhere to attend school. Most of them were even too poor to afford private tutors and homeschooling services. Even though not all of the 9 returned to Little Rock Central High, the group has been widely recognized for their significant act in the civil rights movement and fighting segregation in schools.
The KKK is one of the most powerful and influential hate groups in America. They were founded at the end of the Civil War to intimidate the black race. They accomplished this through violence, killings, and threats. As they grew, they formed ranks like Imperial Wizard, Grand Dragon, and Grand Giant.
After internal power struggles and bad publicity, they fell and never recovered to their former numbers. The KKK still preach white supremacy and are openly opposed to equality between races, let alone in our education system.
Many other areas also refuse to let segregation go, regardless of it being ruled unconstitutional. The most education-segregated state is Virginia, followed by Louisiana, Wisconsin, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, tying for 4th and 5th place in 2011 to 2012. Living in the 5th most education-segregated state in our country is very disheartening, and we want to change.
Well, I'm certainly not happy with that statistic. And I think policymakers, meaning the State Board of Education and our legislators, our governors, and local policymakers, meaning school board members and local government officials, need to work harder to make that statistic less true. If you're asking me how I feel about it, I'm very unhappy about that, and don't like hearing that. Yeah.
The education environment for African Americans and Hispanics in some areas of the country are not preferable, typically taught by unqualified teachers.
Many school systems have developed new ways of separating and treating black and white students differently, such as providing better resources and teachers to white students while leaving lower quality supplies and environments for colored students. According to a speech by George Wallace, former governor of Alabama, in 1963, he would continue to exercise states' rights by continuing with segregation, despite what the Supreme Court said in Brown v. Board of Education.
Many argue that segregation in schools, even after all America has experienced, is still present. Some would even say it's just as prevalent as before Brown v. Board of Education, and all the cases that have fought to change it.
Throughout American history, segregation has been a huge problem that doesn't seem to end. And our country isn't doing anything to change that. The Little Rock Nine fought inequality in schools and made it clear that we should still be fighting to defeat discrimination and stand up for egalitarianism throughout our nation.
We think that it is wrong that there was and still is separation against a large fraction of our country based on the color of their skin. Being an American means that everyone, despite race, age, gender, or religion, should be treated equally.
Education is a right for everyone, and the quality of schooling should not be limited to any race.